Good morning, everybody.
Good morning and happy Fitness Friday.
We are excited today. It's a mouthful, but we're going to talk to you about your Myzone zone in comparison to the talk test and your rate of perceived exertion. And this is a topic that sort of piggybacks off of last week's Myzone Fitness Friday. So if you haven't seen last Friday's broadcast, go back and watch it.
Exactly, because this will tie in beautifully.
Yeah.
I am Dr. Ayla Donlin.
And I'm Emily Sopo.
And we are your Myzone Master Trainers. I hold my doctoral degree in educational leadership. Both Emily and myself hold master's degrees in kinesiology, Emily in exercise science, myself in sport and exercise psychology. We are also regular Myzone users, certified group exercise instructors, personal trainers. We use Myzone for our own workouts, of course, and then we use it with our clients in our group exercise classes. So the topic we're talking about today is actually one that comes up frequently, I know, for me and my clients.
Yes,
so this will be a good one.
Absolutely. If you want to learn more about Myzone right off the bat, be sure to check out myzone.org, where you can learn all about this excellent effort tracker, effort rewarded, as well as I was looking on some Myzone Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and the red sports bra is now available. So
yeah.
Awesome. You can also get your Myzone sports bras, ladies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello, Coach B, and hello, Marcin.
Good morning, guys.
Here it comes.
Should we hop right in?
No, I got to tell them to leave us comments and questions.
Oh, okay.
my mind was just having a hard time getting that to come out of my mouth. So if you have comments or questions, please bring them on during the live broadcast. If you're watching the replay, continue to ask questions, make comments, because we'll go back and we'll respond to any comments or questions. And if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, pop over to the Myzone Facebook page and leave us a little comment there, and make sure that you address it to Emily and I so that we can respond to you.
Yes, absolutely. Shall we begin with the topic? Okay,
let's get in.
Cool, here we go. My job first. I'm going to review the Myzone zones and why we train in each zone. So as a Myzone user, you are probably very familiar with these beautiful colored zones that Myzone has created. Gray, between 50 and 59% of your estimated maximal heart rate. Blue, between 60 and 69% of your maximal heart rate. Green, between 70 and 79% of your estimated maximal heart rate. Yellow, 80 to 89% of your estimated maximal heart rate. And finally, the red zone, 90 and above percent of your maximal heart rate. Yes. And why we train in each of these zones will be different, and of course it will really depend on your goals and also your fitness level. For example, someone, let's use Ayla for example, who has done marathons and is a cardio queen. She can train in some of those higher hot zones, right? Where someone just starting out might not quite be there yet. So when we think about the zones, the lighter zones, or the cooler zones rather, the gray, the blue, the green, those are great recovery and base building zones, whereas the yellow and the red are more pushing it to our capacity and really expanding our fitness level.
Yes, that's a wonderful quick overview.
Thank you.
So I'm going to come in and I'm going to talk about how the rate of perceived exertion scale compares to each of those zones. And I need to put this down because I got to talk with both hands on this one. Okay, so Emily was talking about the cool zones, the gray, the blue, and the green. Usually when we're going to use the rate of perceived exertion scale in comparison to our Myzone zones, we recommend a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 is very minimal exertion, like you're maybe walking lightly on the treadmill, maybe even that, right? And then we work our way up to 3 to 5, which could start to be considered more toward the moderate side. And the 5, 6, 7 is still moderate, but getting toward vigorous exertion or heavy exertion. And it should feel at that point, it should start to feel challenging. And as you go from 7, 8, 9, we go from what feels hard to something that should feel very hard. And when you get into 9, 10 on that scale, that should feel very, very hard. So let me go back to these cool zones that I was just mentioning, gray, blue, green. Let's start with gray. When you're in the gray zone, 50 to 59% of your maximal heart rate. Your RPE, your rate of perceived exertion, we would guess would be around a 5, maybe a 6. Then when you migrate into the blue zone, 60 to 69% of your maximal heart rate, then we would estimate that you'd be at about a 6, maybe up toward a 7, especially as you're getting toward the latter part of the blue zone.
Or even a 5 still.
Or even a 5 still, and we're going to talk in a little bit about when and why your rate of perceived exertion might not match exactly with your zone. So for example, yeah, if you're in the warm-up and you're in the blue zone, maybe you're only going to feel like you're a 5 out of 10 on the scale of rate of perceived exertion,
I'm
right?
a 2, just kidding.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, not that low.
Elite status, elite. Good morning, Chris. Okay, so now as we get up into the green zone, I find that this is where the game starts to change for most people, and we're going to talk about the talk test.
Yeah.
And I think this is where the talk test really comes in as well. But in the green zone, 70 to 79% of your maximal heart rate, we would guess that your rate of perceived exertion, or the correlation, the relationship, should be about a 7, maybe creeping up toward an 8, or maybe even still a 6, depending on where you're at in your workout, right? So you'll notice that there are ranges of what would be an appropriate relationship between rate of perceived exertion and the Myzone zones. As we get into yellow, 80 to 89% of your maximal heart rate, this is where we would anticipate your rate of perceived exertion to be an 8, maybe even a 9 in the yellow zone. And especially the more fit you become, it's actually going to probably feel more challenging. Your rate of perceived exertion might be a little bit higher to get into the yellow zone. And then when we're in the red zone, my friends, that should feel like your rate of perceived exertion should feel like a 9, maybe even a 10, especially as you're getting up into the red zone. And if you are getting close or hitting 100% of your maximal heart rate, that should absolutely feel like a 10. And if it doesn't, you need to revisit what we were talking about last week in terms of appropriately estimating your maximal heart rate. So that's an overview of the rate of perceived exertion in comparison to the Myzone zones.
Yes, and we briefly talked last week about the talk test. So in this video, kind of round 2 of last week's talk, let's go deeper into the talk test.
Yes.
The talk test is a very nice, however, it is a subjective scale that you can use, no equipment needed. You can just use it as you're talking to someone. Essentially, as we're exercising and as our exercise intensity increases, our respiratory rate increases, our breathing rate, our heart rate increases, and so that's how we're using the talk test, assuming that as our exercise intensity increases, we're going to be breathing more heavily. It's going to be harder and harder to get words out. So the way that these correlate, or tend to correlate, and again, this is relatively subjective, but a lot of us don't have a whole lot more testing capabilities than just having our heart rate monitor, right? Our Myzone. So this is another one of those subjective scales. When you're in the gray zone, 50 to 59%, you should be able to say couple sentences at a time, maybe even have a conversation.
Exactly. I was just going to say that you should be relatively conversational at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Like in the warm-up stage of the classes that I teach. Yes. And then next up in the blue zone, now we're getting a little bit more challenged. We should be able to say a couple sentences at a time, right? In the green zone, where it starts to get a little bit more challenging, we're starting to sweat more, we're starting to breathe a little bit more heavily, maybe a sentence. And that's it, right?
Yeah.
Moving on to the yellow zone, this is where we're able to say a few words at a time, but not a whole lot more than that. Like, hey, how you doing, Ayla? How you feeling?
Right. And I'll be able to say, I'm good.
Yeah, exactly. Now, when we get up into the red zone, the most challenging zone that we can be in, that's where we either should not be able to talk or can say, like, I'm still alive. Maybe if that, right?
Yeah, a word or two, maybe.
Yeah. So that's a scale that you can use if you're a trainer. You can very easily use that one during exercise with your clients, or if you're working out with a friend, then you can always just kind of keep track and hold each other accountable with that talk test.
Exactly. And you might notice as you become more fit, you're able to talk more fluidly in the cooler zones.
Yeah.
So maybe when you're just getting started in an exercise program, it feels difficult to talk even in like blue or green, but as you become more fit, you can probably talk a little bit more easily at those levels of intensity.
Yeah, exactly. Hi, Michelle and Marina.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. Yeah.
And Emily, I'm so glad that you pointed out that the talk test is a subjective assessment, and so is rate of perceived exertion.
Yeah.
And so the next thing we're going to get into is when and why the rate of perceived exertion assessment, or the talk test, might not match up beautifully with your Myzone zones, why there might be some discrepancy between heart rate and the rate of perceived exertion in the talk test. Because just like we talk about that there are many factors that affect heart rate, there are probably just as many, if not more, factors that would affect rate of perceived exertion and talk test, because they are subjective assessments. So there'll be not only physiological factors that will have an influence on them, but also psychological factors that will have an influence on them.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. So
yeah.
the first one is with resistance training. Now we mentioned this last week because we were talking about when you might need to change your estimated maximal heart rate, and I think I said you might be holding a plank and feeling like you are,
Right.
at maximal effort, but your heart rate's in the blue zone, right?
Exactly.
During resistance training, our rate of perceived exertion, how we perceive what our effort is according to how our body feels, is not necessarily going to match up with your Myzone zone.
Right.
So in terms of the talk test, gosh, you could be doing 12 repetitions of something. You're not able to talk
No.
during those.
So you're focusing on breathing.
Yeah, exactly. You shouldn't be talking, right? But again, it won't necessarily match up with the zone that you're in.
Right, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Another time when your rate of perceived exertion in your talk test might not match up with heart rate or your Myzone zones is when you're overtrained or when you're under the weather. So when we're overtrained, we might feel like our exertion is very, very hard, but we're only showing that we're in the green zone and we just feel like we can't get our heart rate up, but we're exerting so hard. That might be an indication that you're overtrained. And we've got a lot of information about this on the blog, so go to myzone.org and check out our blogs about overtraining, and we also talked about this on a Fitness Friday, so you can go back to the YouTube channel and check that out as well. Another case would be if you're super stressed in terms of like being under the weather. If you're super stressed, you might feel like you're exerting really hard, but again, your heart rate might not match that.
Yeah. And for that matter, you might not want to talk. So your talk test might not even be relevant if you're overtrained or really stressed out.
Right.
Yeah. What about illness?
Yeah, so with illness, especially like if it's a respiratory issue in terms of the talk test, right? Your rate of perceived exertion might not even feel that high, and your heart rate might be in the blue or the green, but you might feel like you're really having a hard time with your respiration, your breathing. And so there are different illnesses, I would say, would affect your rate of perceived exertion and your talk test differently, but in general, you might feel like you're exerting a lot harder than what your heart rate is indicating.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, the next one that we're going to discuss, and the last one we'll discuss, is when you're doing a new modality of cardiorespiratory exercise. Specifically, we're talking about cardio here. So if you are a trained cyclist, right, and you're not used to running, let's just say, or we've got a piece of equipment where we work the crank cycle, which is an upper body ergometer, like a bicycle for your arms, is how I try to explain it. And when people try that and they're not used to upper body continuous exercise, their rate of perceived exertion and their Myzone zone probably don't align a whole lot.
Exactly.
Yeah, we might be all over the place.
And I also think about the Jacob's ladder, because I feel like I could run for a really long time, and then you hop on the Jacob's ladder and you think that you could go for a really long time, but boom, like my heart rate skyrockets pretty quickly. So new mode, and it's very much full body, like dynamic movement, and so there's just a difference there.
So our recommendation to you then is to base your estimated maximal heart rate, which is what we were talking about last week, on the modality of cardiorespiratory exercise that you perform the most, right? If you're training for a marathon in which you're going to jog or run, then that should be the modality that you're using to gauge your estimated maximal heart rate.
Sure. Or whichever one you're going to be using to make that comparison. So if you are switching gears and you're going to start taking a bunch of cycling classes, then you could start to use that. But don't base this off of just one time of making that comparison. So don't assess your rate of perceived exertion in your talk test compared to your heart rate in just a single session and think you need to make changes to your maximal heart rate, your estimated maximal heart rate. Do this over time. I was responding to someone's comments on the Facebook Live video last week that I would want to see, if I were your trainer, I'd probably want to see 5 to 7 different workout profiles of like a same or similar modality to be able to really say whether or not I thought your estimated maximal heart rate was accurate compared to how you were feeling.
Yeah. All right, guys.
Right on.
I think that was our topic for today. If you have questions, let us know in the comment section below.
Yes, please do. And if you have not yet added Emily Sopo and Ayla Donlin as social connections, please do that. It's been really fun connecting with you guys on our Myzone app or the Myzone user page, and we can leave each other comments and ask questions there. So make sure you're connecting with one another and with us as social connections.
Yes, and share this video out. You don't necessarily have to share it on your own page if you don't want to, like, we understand that, but you can always comment in the comment section below and tag a person who you think would reap value from this broadcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are here every Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Thank you for tuning in from all around the world. We love that we have a lot of international guests and Myzone users. Shout out to our peeps in the UK. Hope you guys are doing well over there.
Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next week.
Sounds great.
And
Keep moving forward.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Michelle.